messy sketch is complete, but you have a grid. So you can either erase the grid so you only see the shapes, or you can get a different piece of paper, go over your grid, and use the light box to trace it. Okay, but what you want is to get rid of the grid and make sure you just have your shapes. So now we're going to move on. We do have to add in the shadow. So you just have to look at your paper and really try to look for where the shadow goes. Okay. In the image, it's a complicated cylinder. You can just make a regular cylinder um, just to make it a little bit easier if you like. So you really have to watch the direction of where the shadows go in the picture. It always starts on the edges of your shapes. You have to remember, always keep in mind the direction of the light, because obviously the shadow would be on the other side of where the light is hitting. You also want to know that the shadow falls from the table, and then as soon as it hits the box, it changes direction. So just make sure you're really looking at the image, because part of this project is to make sure that you are training your eye how to see the shapes, how to see light and shadow, and how to see the detail. So if you're going to do a regular cylinder, a plain cylinder, you don't have to draw the extra shape in your shadow. So here you see I'm just going straight across. If you're doing the complicated cylinder, you are going to need to draw where there's a little indent by the cap. Okay. The cones, you just go from the edges of both sides, the bottoms. On mine, there isn't a space in between the box, but you can just get it as close as you can. Just be true to the shapes that you are drawing, and just make sure you follow the direction. So that's the second thing, is make sure that the direction of your shadows are going the same way. They almost always go the same way. They'll turn a little bit due to where they are in relation to your light, but for the most part, they're going in the same direction. So just make sure you erase inside your shapes. You don't, you're going to shade and you don't want to see that. So it would have been better to not draw through your shapes. The last one is the shadow for your sphere on the box. Just really look at your image so that you can see it. So now we're ready to start shading. So I want you to start in the shadow. So what part is the darkest? So if you remember the value scale, these are what the shades are going to follow. But here you can see, I really need you to look, that the shadow on the table is darker than the shadow on the box. So with your 6B, you're just going to lay in some lead. But just remember, the pressure needs to be different. Okay, so I had to jump ahead. We just stopped talking about laying in the shadow by the cylinder, where it's darker where it's on the table and it gets lighter when it's on the box. The background here, the darkest area, it's just a 6B laying it in. We're going to jump ahead to what's next. You have to delete your highlights, so just erase them. We're going to start shading in these shapes. I'll have to go back and do another video. So I'm just erasing it. It looks scary, but you can see it. Here you're seeing I needed the shadow filled in by the cylinder. Just know that right behind the cylinder it is a little lighter. And then on the side of the box, this is the darkest spot. I just laid in the 6B, just made it really dark. As soon as you lay in the lead, you just kind of blend it with a bigger blending stick or a paper towel. But you just want to be careful about the side. So now we're going to shade in the table, and just notice that there is tone. It's just not very dark. And you want to start on the dark side first and move it over. Again, just look at your reference photo and it should help you. What we're doing with the table is we're trying to lay down enough tone that you can erase for the highlights. You see me here trying to erase for the highlight, and it's an edge. That's what you want, is an edge. So here I need to lay in more tone so that I can see the other shapes. So with that darker lead, I touched the paper and it's easy to just get it off. You just get a rubbery eraser. Okay, so it does need to be darker around the shapes. So hopefully you saw me that I'm always dumping it in the shadow area just to check of how much lead I have on my paper towel. Just because you don't want to have it go too dark too fast. Your paper towel is really going to save you. So here you see I'm starting to lay in the shadow on the cylinder. Again, it's just a paper towel. I'm just laying down. I'm sort of mapping out the shape, but instead of with the pencil, with the lead on the paper towel. So here you see I just pulled some from the outside, and I'm mapping in the cone also. So I'm always starting in the shadow because I know that that's a darker area, and then I blend it and add more as I need to. So hopefully you saw there, I started to add some shadow on the box to pop the other side of the cylinder. Here you can see in the picture that the shadow side of the cone is actually pretty dark. So I have to add in more with my 6B. I also see that there's a shadow on the bottom of the cone. So I am using my 6B at times to make it darker. Hopefully you'll see that the cone, the shadow of the cone is darker than the shadow of the cylinder. And that's just due to how much bounce reflective light there is on the cylinder versus the cone, where it's a little bit past the box, so there's no reflective light. So again, as soon as you lay in the 6B, you do want to blend, either with a paper towel or a blending stub. Here you see that I'm sharpening up the shadow on the box to pop the highlight on the cone. So you're going to figure out what materials to use and when. I want more control, so I'm using the smaller blending stick to create the shadow inside the cone. Again, you really need to look at where you see the shadow. You should be flipping your paper around so that it's just easier for you to work with and you can see your shapes a lot better. Again, for your highlight to pop, you need to have some sort of shade around it. So one thing that I saw as students were working today is there needs to be a distinction in your shapes, especially where the box hits the table. So make sure that you're always being aware and really looking for that line, because the box goes behind all of your shapes. So you should be able to see it. So as you're working, you want to make sure that you see all the values in your shapes, because that's something that I'm grading you on, is that you have the illusion of form with no outlines. To achieve this, you have to make sure that you have all of the values and that you're blending. So even though I put a shadow on the bottom of the cylinder, I did blend it with the blending stick just to make sure that it was sort of softened, but it wasn't a solid line. So if you did a simple cylinder, you don't really have anything to look at, but you have to think about it logically, of where is the light, where would the shadow be, and you can look at my example of where it is darker on the top back side. So the sphere, I kind of skipped that in this video. We did shade the sphere before this, so you should know how to do that. The top of the box is just pretty light. It should be darker than the front and darker than the side. Okay.